Hey, welcome back to Insights of All Trades, the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Riggin' It Gear. This is the company that Jacob Younger had talked about starting up after he finished his Appalachian Trail thru hike. It's a company that specializes in hiking gear and packs, so check them out. It's RIGGINITGEAR. You can find them on Instagram or just go directly to the merchandise website, which is r-i-g.co. So give them some support, and thanks, Jacob. Okay, so on this episode of the show, I brought my friend Souvik Roy on. We both go to medical school here at Pitt, and he's a neuroscience guy, so we kind of talk about a lot of neuroscience stuff, which is really interesting. He tries to boil it down a little bit so I can understand it better, and hopefully everyone listening can understand it. We just have a couple beers, kind of just chat and have a fun time. So stay tuned for that. I have a quick insight for you. This comes from an author who pretty much all of you probably know, Mark Twain, a.k.a. Samuel Langhorne Clemens. So you like what I did there? Haha. Anyways, he's got a quote here in Adventures of Huck Finn. It says, "If you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory." I think that's a pretty good, I don't know if it's an insight necessarily, but I think it's a good thing to live by is, just try and live by the truth, right? Try not to say too many lies and get yourself caught and get in trouble. So anyways, stay tuned for Souvik, and it's a good one. Welcome to Insights of All Trades with Cole and Nick. This is where we talk to people we meet along our journeys through medicine, military service, sports, education, and beyond. We hope you enjoy. All right, and we're live.
All right, sounds good.
What's up, Souvik? How you doing, man?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good. So Souvik and I met each other in what's called the Prologue to Medicine at Pitt, because we both started medical school at the same time. And so this Prologue to Medicine thing is like how would you describe it? Like a couple courses to kind of introduce you to medical school before, actually getting into the nitty-gritty of it, right?
Yeah, I feel like it was a little bit of a warm-up. Fun little program. They gave us some money to come down here for about, I would say, 5 weeks, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that, yeah.
We just kind of listened to a few lectures every day. It was just a lot of fun. I feel like we kind of messed around the whole time.
Yeah, it was more of like a hangout thing, meet people, than it was really to do the classes and everything. But, I mean, it was still good that we got exposed to anatomy because that's such a beast of a class. So anyways, we met there. That was like a year and a half ago now, probably.
Oh, my.
Which time's really flying. I know. So let's see. That was then. And then we finished first year, and now we're in second year. I feel like I don't see you as much anymore. I feel like, nobody really sees each other as much second year. Everyone's just kind of nose in a book or, secluded away and doing me time kind of stuff. But, we got together tonight. Decided, hey, let's shoot a podcast, have a couple beers, and see what's good. So, anyways, why don't you tell people a little about yourself? I know you're pretty interested in neuro. You're thinking maybe neurosurgery. You got some other interests, and we're also in the same. It's called the Neuroscience Area of Concentration, or AOC. So I do get to see it that sometimes. But go ahead and just tell us who you are.
A little bit of myself. I went to we both go to Pitt Med. Went to Pitt Med for undergrad, Pitt,
University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, for undergrad. Right. And I guess a little bit about me is I'm from Canton, Michigan, very kind of generic suburb. And
suburb of what city?
Detroit.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's been a lot of fun for me to really get into medicine.
Yeah.
I feel like medical school is kind of like a train, once kind of Prologue wound down, we had 3 weeks off. It's been definitely an experience where we're kind of ramping up in terms of skill.
Yeah, for sure. And we have boards coming up pretty soon, the USMLE Step 1. So everyone's kind of scrambling and freaking out a little bit about that. We just had a meeting today actually about, how to schedule your Step 1 and everything. You could see the stress on everyone's face about that. And I definitely am feeling that as well. Are you?
Yeah, a little bit. I feel like we're kind of at that stage where I think a lot of us had a little bit of anxiety kind of applying to medical school. I mean, I assume you're in the same boat where everyone's really kind of anxious, but as far as like once we're kind of in medical school, we sort of feel like we made it. And I'm a little concerned about step one as any medical student, but I feel like we're gonna be doctors. We'll be fine.
Yeah, and at some point you have to
Kinda mellow
care
down.
less about like the grades and more care about the bigger picture that's coming. So I don't know. I guess if you want to do something like neurosurge, maybe you got to do pretty well on step. But if you want to do something internal medicine or family medicine or something that I'm kind of leaning toward, I don't have to shoot quite for the stars on it. I mean, I still will, hopefully, but
Yeah.
time will tell. Because that's one of those things where people, I guess, they just study all day long, every day for about 6 weeks during our they call it dedicated. So we get a dedicated 6 weeks off of school just to study for this board's exam. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I can force myself to sit down and study all day, every day for 6 weeks straight, but I guess it'll be a test on our mental limits and capacities, huh?
Yeah. I feel like what's kind of cool about medicine versus a lot of your listeners might have gone to college and stuff, and you kind of get that vibe in college of you sort of go to a class, you learn a bunch of stuff, and the day after the final, someone asks you a question, you have no idea what you're talking
Yeah,
about
and it
anymore.
doesn't matter because, like,
Yeah.
what were you learning? For certain majors, it's like, at least for my major in bio, which seems like very related, there's a lot of stuff that in bio that I was just like, why did I need to learn this?
Yeah. Whereas I feel like what I've always found really compelling about medicine is the idea of it being so hands-on in terms of like you get to learn stuff that like actually gets like you get to fix people. You get to like actually like learn things that will help people and like the real world solutions to real world problems instead of just like memorizing a pathway or memorizing a bunch of chemical reactions you'll never do. Here
Yeah.
it's like actual drugs you'll give to actual people.
Yeah, exactly. And you've been shadowing a good bit in the OR, right? Under neurosurgery, and you get to experience the real deal, what it's going to be like someday. And I think that kind of probably also helps keep you a little closer to ground level and like realizing what the bigger picture is. So that's pretty cool stuff. Anyway, so do you want to talk more about you, or should we just like dive into some random stuff? And
If you want to ask me any more questions, feel free.
sounds good. So I mean, it's a Friday night. We kind of went away from our party days of first year, and now we just a lot of us just kind of chill and hang out, have a
Yeah.
couple beers.
I feel like
Really?
I don't know if you feel this way too, but I think that med school kind of falls in a very interesting sort of growing up period for a lot of us, because I think like some of your listeners out there might have been kind of people who like right out of high school they were doing interesting stuff that was very like adult like, but we just kind of like prolonged high school for 4 more years, right?
Yeah.
And like now it's like you're what, 24 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
well,
I'm
23, but almost 24.
yeah. So I just turned 24 like 2 months ago, but it's kind of crazy where like you feel like you're finally like an actual like real life adult, and I know that like tends to come earlier for some people, but I feel like for our like kind of cohort of students, it's just a really interesting time to meld those sorts of worlds.
Yeah, and I certainly still feel like sometimes I feel like I'm still like a kid almost. It's like, who gave me this responsibility to be here right now? But I know what you're saying. Like, it does feel like we're really growing up. At the same time, it still kind of feels like we're in high school a little bit in the med school level, just because our class is so small. It's like 160 people or something. But we're definitely, gaining these responsibilities and, kind of just learning how to be an adult. Also, what helps for me is since I'm in the Army, I actually get a paycheck now rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
So that helps to make me feel a little bit more adult-like. But yeah, like I was saying, we're just kind of here chilling tonight, a couple beers, and we'll just see where it takes us, I guess. So since you're really into neuro, and we're both kind of into neuro with the neuroscience AOC and everything, did you see recently in Pittsburgh there was some fMRI study, like functional magnetic resonance imaging, on people's brains that apparently they're going to be able to read people's thoughts and kind of read people's minds through these fMRI studies?
Well, see, I think that's a interesting technology because I'm not particularly sure of like exactly what study you're referring to. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about it?
So I didn't actually read it. I just saw like the news headline,
Yeah.
which I probably should have read it now that I brought it up. But basically, there was like it was either at Carnegie Mellon or Pitt, somewhere here in Pittsburgh. They did a study with FMRI, like being able to read people's thoughts. I guess more so than getting into the nitty gritty of what would the actual neuro behind it be. It's more like, what do you think of that as a concept that like possibly soon, maybe even already, people can read other people's minds through technology?
Well, I guess there's two parts to me, right? The first part is the sort of like nitty gritty realist, right? Where like the reason I kind of like asked you for like a little bit more detail on that is because I think that that technology, as far as like really like getting meaningful information from people's brains by just looking at a magnetic image of it, is, as far as I know, pretty far off. You know,
Okay.
in terms of like the sorts of studies that fMRI can look at is, when you do X task, we see Y brain activity going on here, right?
Hmm.
But you see how like fundamentally, like the way I just said that is, you would say like that's a correlation, that's not a causation. You can't
Right.
say because you see Y brain activity, you're thinking X thought, right?
Yeah.
But
So I just found the article. I brought it up here.
oh,
It's from
okay.
CBS News, and the headline is: Scientists are using MRI scans to reveal the physical makeup of our thoughts and feelings. And it says 10 years ago, 60 Minutes met a team of scientists at CMU who had begun to decode simple thoughts inside the brain. Now they've moved on to identifying complex thoughts from spirituality to suicide. So it looks like it's trending in a direction. So far, maybe they can't actually read our minds yet, but it's trending toward a direction of it seems like maybe they'll be able to read those thoughts. Because if you can tease apart spirituality and suicide in the brain, that's maybe the first step. But what's stopping that from exploding? And it's like now we can tease apart dog from cat and everything like that.
I guess. I mean, I feel like I've seen like in a lot of my research, I've seen a lot of information on the human motor system and what Pittsburgh is kind of famous for in terms of the machine brain interface is being able to take people's brain activity and translate that into like what they want to do with a person's robotic arm. So, and it is like if you've never seen it, but there's some great videos online. It is mind blowing stuff. Like where I remember I saw a patient once who had a CU5 nerve injury, and what that really means for some of the listeners out there is basically they can't really move any of their limbs at all, and they're kind of confined to a wheelchair. However, this patient had a brain chip inserted that actually reads the motor information within their brain to help them control a robot arm, and
Wow.
it's wild. Like
Yeah, that's
it's the
crazy.
coolest thing to be like. I remember.
So how does that work? Like, how do you find the exact spot in the brain? So like the motor cortex or whatever it would be. How do you find that exact spot and find the right place to place a chip so that you don't screw something else up?
So the way you kind of do it is that's the problem is it's not a clean interpretation. The way they sort of go about it is they put what is a electrode microarray. So it's about a 1 by 1 centimeter chip that has 100 electrodes in it, and these electrodes go into the brain, and it's just the surface of the brain which is where like a lot of the neurons are, and it's able to monitor the electrical activity of about 1 to 1.5 neurons, like in
That
that vicinity.
precise.
Yeah, it's about that precise. It's crazy.
That's crazy because
And
neurons are, how big is a neuron? Like
ooh,
tiny.
man, yeah, tiny. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'd say like nanometers.
Yeah.
And essentially, what they do is they use machine learning to interpret what each like little electrode is interpreting. So what they'll do is they'll train a machine to say like, okay, you talk to the patient and you train them in a virtual simulator
Mhm.
where it kind of says, you want to move left? Okay, like think about moving left. Like think really, really hard about moving left, and that'll create brain activity in your mind,
Mhm.
and it'll be picked up by the microelectrode array. And what happens is they can start to catch on to patterns. And I guess I wouldn't go into so much the mathematics of it, but essentially,
Hey, go for it. I don't know.
I mean, it involves a little bit of linear algebra that I'm not so great at, but
forget it.
but I think like that stuff is
So how precise are these things? So is it like, oh, I can turn to the left, or is it like I can play a piano precise?
maybe not play a piano, but definitely do like most tasks.
So you can pick something up.
Yeah, you definitely pick things up, put them down. Like it was wild. Like what kind of blew my mind was like the patient that I was watching was holding an object with the robot arm, and the person who was a researcher told him to like think drop, 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 and she just said drop a bunch of times, and the arm released, and it like actually like accidentally dropped an object on the floor.
That's crazy.
It's wild. Like the thing, like you know, to be able to be precise enough to like know how to fumble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think
So you think we're getting better and better? Oh, obviously, we're getting better and better at reading how the brain works and what it's doing, and a lot of it's electrical stuff, correct? Electrical activity. So I don't know, how do you measure electrical activity that small without all the other noise going around? So like, I know whenever I was doing some FMRI studies in undergrad, there was a lot of stuff you had to filter out, like fMRI reads your blood oxygen levels in the brain, and basically you can measure different metabolic processes happening, but it basically measures how much blood flow there is to certain regions. And one thing you have to filter for is each heartbeat, because if you have a heartbeat, it's going to shoot a ton of blood to your brain, and then when in between beats, there's going to be less blood, and that's not necessarily a neurological like thought or something going on. So basically what I'm saying is, how do you dissect out all the extra noise from these electrical signals to be able to put someone's arm back together, basically?
So the way this is kind of why I was being sort of, I guess, a bit of a cynic earlier when you were asking about the idea of being able to read people's thoughts, because the only way this works is because the patient that we had, they consented to having a surgery where their brain was opened up and an actual like electrode was placed into their brain cortex, right? And the idea of noise is very, very important in terms of interpreting brain signals, because that's why I would say that we're very, very far away from that sort of technology today, because you know things like EEG, which is electric encephalography, right?
Yeah.
I always say EEG.
Yeah.
And then
yeah, whenever I was saying fMRI, I was like, wait, okay, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. But it's the same thing with fMRI, right? Where like fundamentally it's a technology that looks at too many neurons at once, right? And I don't know, are you like well versed in neuroscience?
So you can only get down to, in fMRI anyways, you can get smaller, but for the most part you want to get down to, they call it a voxel, which is like a little 1 by 1 millimeter cube, or slightly smaller, but at some point it just kind of blends together and it smooths the signal, instead of being spikes and stuff, smooths together at a certain like smaller resolution, I guess.
But the challenge with the idea of a voxel is what you have to kind of wrap your head around is a 1 by 1 millimeter like cube within the human brain contains almost 200 to 400,000 neurons, right? And so to the people kind of like understand the idea of computer circuits, those neurons could be all doing completely different things. And that's why, you know, our technology is so...
it's an average level of what's going on in that tiny area, but that tiny area could have literally so much going on, so...
Yeah. And part of it is like all those neurons are communicating with each other, and that's what kind of like makes the brain such a fascinating organ, is that it's so many like minute little pieces. And I feel like we've been learning a lot about like all sorts of organs of the human body, and like nothing quite works on that scale of just a single cell having a think, and like it sends it to a different cell, and you know, like very few other organs work like that, where what's going on in one cell could be completely different to the cell right next to it.
Yeah, and what other organ is there that we know basically nothing about? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we know about the brain, but do we really? Like, do we know what that is? Do we know what's going on up there? Like, we have some pretty good guesses, but whereas like a liver cell or like a heart cell. We know everything going on there. I feel like, anyways.
Most everything.
But with the brain, it's still such a mystery. It seems.
I feel like a metaphor I heard once that I kind of recall right now is if you were to think about knowing nothing about the human brain as point zero, and knowing every single thing about the human brain to the point where we could interpret thoughts through brain activity as a mile long, we as the human race are about 3 inches in.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy
Yeah.
thought. Like,
Well, but also things are growing exponentially though. So you crack the code originally and it's like, okay, things are moving slow, but we at least broke through to understanding something about it. And now, we're 3 inches in, but maybe by 2050, we're like, a quarter mile in because it's just growing on that just huge upward slope. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, especially with us being able to develop things along the lines of AI it's going to be theoretically smarter than us, which makes total sense. But something that's going to be way smarter than us can probably tackle these problems a lot faster
yeah.
and a lot more efficiently.
No, I think like if I were to right now identify like what is my passion in terms of research is I'm really interested in the interaction between machines and brains. I think that that area actually holds a lot of promise because if you think about it this way, the human brain is a piece of hardware that is 1.8 million years old, right?
Right.
Think about a computer that's 40 years old, right?
Yeah.
And so if we could kind of in that context of creating a new brain that is able to comprehend just a little bit better, maybe that could create the next software that's even better to interpret. And
Does it feel like evolution to you? Like,
yeah, in a really like driven way. But yeah.
It's like we're actively making it happen. Like there's clear human interaction with this evolution, but it does seem like evolution.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's like the field of research I'm like most interested in.
Yeah.
Is the kind of like possibilities that could hold for us.
So what kind of stuff are you researching right now? I feel like I haven't talked to you about research for a while.
Oh man, I'm like all over the place these days. So what I worked on over the summer was a project looking at creating a database of information about the human motor system and kind of starting to catalog all the work that's out there. And you know how I feel like scientific research is in a very interesting place right now where there's a lot of it going on, but not a lot of it seems incredibly directed.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people like have you ever published before, Nick?
Once, yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you publish a paper and it just kind of like goes and sits on like a shelf somewhere?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's probably been like 50 people in this world that have read that paper.
Yeah. And I think that like what this study was trying to do is take all those like, those FMRI studies that you were mentioning, like those sorts of studies that look at correlations in the human brain and start to put them together into a bigger picture. And it's a pretty ambitious project. I won't lie.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily like the leader in that realm because I don't have that level of expertise yet.
Yeah.
But that was my someday. That was my summer project. Other than that, what I've really been passionate about lately is like clinical research because I think clinical research is a lot like more exciting. It's like a lot more in terms of taking care of patients. It really drives patient care.
Yeah. And as far as research goes, that's kind of where you learn everything is by the patients because you can't do these sort of brain studies on somebody ethically unless you're doing it on animals. But, doing this clinical research, doing like patient chart reviews and things like that, you can get information on somebody that's had a neurological event happen to them, but it wasn't like somebody intervening and making that happen for the purposes of research. So you kind of get access to a different scope or a different realm of people and different realm of results, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, the way I would kind of look at it is the difference between a top-down and a bottom-up approach, right? So a lot of the sort of I feel like the problem with some of our education in terms of undergraduate biology or neuroscience studying is we learn a lot of bottom-up approaches, right? Where we look for like signals within cells. We look for molecules, things moving around, and try to see like what that molecule moving around or like being in a certain place could mean for the entire system. However, clinical research switches that perspective. It looks from the top down. So it says like, okay, there's something going on here that we don't really understand completely. right? Like, let's say, like, okay, one study I'm currently working on is looking at the use of ketamine in terms of helping people recover from spinal surgery, right?
Okay.
So we don't know everything about ketamine. We don't know every single, molecule that it changes, every single cellular pathway it affects. However, we do know that we can give people ketamine ethically, and it does help them sometimes in terms of recovery and minimizes their use of opioids.
Okay. Wow.
Right.
That's
And
cool.
so you see how, like, in
Yeah.
terms of, like, we don't know what's going on under the hood, but as long as we, like, know that itself, like, it's working,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That top down, bottom up approach thing you were talking about. I sent you that video about it's called Your Strange Loop, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? That
That
video.
stuff is wild,
It's
man.
trippy in the head. But that's like it takes a similar stance in that explaining what the I is, or like what an actual person who's thinking, and what do they call the metacognition? Yeah, when people are
I
like,
feel like for the listeners out there, this is a channel called Exerbia. I highly, highly recommend it. That was who made that, right?
no,
Was
who
it
made this
Exerbia?
one? No, it was it's just a guy. His name's like Will Schroeder.
Oh, Will show. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
and it's
Sorry
like
about that.
spelled like Schoder.
Yeah, and it's really cool kind of stuff. It's like a little mix of science and existentialism, which I
Yeah,
feel like
and
that's the
he
kind of
also
discussion
pulls
we're
in
in.
like art and other things like that too,
Yeah.
like modern culture, pop culture stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so in this video, and also the books behind you there somewhere, Douglas Hofstadter, it basically says that the idea of a self, or like the I, is really just an illusion, because whenever you try and do that top down approach and say like, oh well, I'm moving my own thoughts, I did this, I started this podcast here today, I clicked the play button, like the idea of that I is an illusion, because it's all really just a bunch of squirting chemicals in your brain, right? And then whenever you go to try and like explain how the I could actually possibly just like emerge from that bunch of squirting chemicals, you end up back on the path. I can't explain it as well as he does, but
I guess the best way to think about it is this: is that, let's say you were running an equation, right? The equation had 3 variables, and x, y, and z, and then you ended up with the result, c, right? That would make sense. You could say like, okay, based on what we see in the last number, we can kind of predict the variables that went in, right? And then now change that variable to be or that same equation to be 10 variables. It starts to become a lot more complex.
yeah.
But if the human self, like we said, is 400,000 neurons per each millimeter of cortex, it starts to become billions of variables, right? And at what point can that be something that's knowable or traceable or understandable?
Exactly. Which kind of brings me to another point. Have you ever heard of Sam Harris? He's got his own podcast. He's a neuroscientist guy.
I don't know if I'm familiar with them.
Yeah. I don't know how to best explain him other than that. He's just like a neuroscientist guy that has a podcast. But he's pretty cool. And anyways, he makes this argument in one of his podcasts that there's no such thing as free will, basically, because no matter what happens, no matter what you do, it's a consequence of a bunch of stimuli and a bunch of different neurons interacting together to make something happen. And it's not like you as an I, like me, I didn't change all those squirting chemicals to do something. That's just how it happened.
Yeah, I mean,
What do you think of that?
Like, as long as we're talking about philosophy, I feel like that's it's very like, I mean, I think science and philosophy are like one and one, but
Yeah. I think everything's kind of merging toward the same like one thing.
Yeah.
It almost seems like
But,
oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Back to your question, but like, I feel like that's fundamentally very reductionist, right? It's saying that like, okay, like there's no free will because there are a million variables that affect this. But if there are so many variables that are constantly changing every single microsecond, right? At what point can it not even be interpreted as an idea of free will, right? Like we are so far from that the only modern interpretation for the next, I would venture 1,000 to 2,000 years is that like we effectively do have free will until the point where we can trace all those, every single like neuron firing in your brain. Until we can do that, then we can say there's no free will.
So it's like an innocent until proven guilty kind of thing.
Yeah,
like we're gonna assume that we have this free will until we
Yeah.
can prove that we don't.
Because it seems like, well, I would say like they're both right in their own way, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying, like, if you look at the ocean, right, you can, like, look at a wave, right? Or you could look at every single molecule moving and try to know every single position that those molecules are moving in, or you could just interpret the wave as a wave.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's very easy to simplify it as a wave.
Yeah,
because
and I think, like,
there's no way we can process every single molecule.
But that's like the necessity. You said, like, theoretically you could, right? Like, you could theoretically, like, if you're looking at a wave of water on the sea, you could see every single molecule push every other molecule to see it move up and create the same shape. But, you know, that's so far beyond us and what we'll see in our lifetimes that we might as well interpret the wave, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I wonder if okay, you said you're pretty interested in, like, this technology with brain stuff and electrodes and all that. Have you heard about the Neuralink stuff through?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've heard that name thrown around so many times, but I haven't personally looked it up or, like, really know anything about it. So would you mind just, like, explaining it a little bit to me, and then?
Yeah, of course. And if any of the listeners want to find out a little bit more, there's an excellent series on Elon Musk's work on this amazing blog site called Wait But Why. It's called Wait But Why. It's like a thing about procrastination, but it's amazing content. If you want to, like, link it in the description.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up right now.
But I feel like the best way to think about what Neuralink is and, like, the vision behind it, it's really very similar to what we do. And I think it's sort of like what kind of brought me into the field. So the idea is this, is that if we can create the sort of technology that allow people to move robot arms, right? If we can take patients who need help and give them the rehab technology that they need to be able to, like, move around objects, even, like, interact with computers, right? Because if you think about, like, moving a robot arm is a lot more complex than moving a person on a keyboard, right?
Right.
And so if we can try to figure out those sorts of things, then by using the information that we glean, remember I talked about the machine learning aspects? By taking the information we glean about the neurons themselves, we can start to make new hypotheses about what each neuron themselves is able to do.
Okay, what do you mean by that? Like, so the machine itself will understand it, but we won't necessarily understand or what?
This is a tough concept to explain a few beers deep, you know?
Yeah, a few beers.
But I guess the best way to think about it is that, let's say I'm able to rig up a machine that is able to analyze all the multiple patterns that are going on in your brain, right? Like, let's say I'm absorbing, like, I'm taking a look at 10 points in your brain, and based on the activity of those 10 points, I can elucidate when you want to move your arm left.
Okay.
But you see how, like, that works the other way as well. Now I know what moving your arm left looks like in your brain.
Yeah, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's the key to the technology, is that it's really supposed to be a technology in which by creating output, we can start to interpret in what's going on under the hood.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, I feel like the problem is, and it's kind of a sad reality of it, is that, like, from my experience within the field, a lot of the technology kind of shortcuts it by using very, very fancy mathematics that I don't even completely understand.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Like, what even is mathematics? You know what I mean, dude? Like,
dude, yeah.
I don't quite understand it, because I don't know if I even understand elementary mathematics, like, intuitively. You know what I mean? Or just, like, actually understanding it. You know, like, I can understand how many books are here because I can picture it. But as soon as you get to, like, levels of, like, thousands, millions, you know, do you really understand? And that's just easy, like, what would you call that? Just elementary mathematics,
Exploration.
Right? Yeah.
I think
but, like, then they start introducing variables, which, like, and then beyond that, you introduce imaginary numbers. And it's just, it gets way too much that it's like, how did someone understand this in the first place? And two, where even is it right now?
The way I always feel about math, and I regret this to this day, that I wasn't an engineer in terms of my education. I wish I'd learned a lot more math than I really did. And I think that the way our country does math education is a huge disservice. Because if you think about it, we place so much emphasis on computation, right? Like, when you think about a derivative, right, or an integral, like, Nick, right? Like, you think, like, oh, like I wouldn't know how to calculate every type of derivative. I wouldn't know how to calculate every type of integral.
Yeah, but also my point is, what is a derivative in real life? Like where do you see an actual example of what a derivative is? You know what I mean? Like that's where I get lost in mathematics. Like I can take the derivative of something, or I can do the basic computation like we learn in school. I did calculus and all that stuff.
That's what's really important is like you have to be able to interpret speed, velocity, like those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Like because I mean like I was saying, like the math that's involved in the sort of work I'm interested in is a 10th order derivative, right? So they do what's called the 10-dimensional vector space. And again, I don't quite like I kind of understand. I understand the philosophy behind it, and essentially like, oh man, now I'm like, do I want to explain the math?
Well, go for it.
Yeah, okay.
Do whatever you can.
I'll do a very poor explanation.
Yeah.
All right.
At least give me a feel for what's going on.
So Nick, why don't you explain what you think an integral is? Like, give me an interpretation of that.
Dude, I couldn't even tell you right now. It's been 4 years since calculus, probably.
Yeah. So I guess the best way I would think of an integral is like if you have a curve, right? It's the area underneath the curve.
Okay.
Right? And now instead
give
of
me an example, like what kind of curve? What are we talking?
I mean, like imagine a parabola, right?
Okay.
And it's the bottom of the U, you know? Like if you take
the bottom of the U, like give me two things like plotted on a thing.
Yeah, like you have like two like bounds, right?
Uh-huh.
And you're able to use the integral to find the area underneath, right?
All right, so let's do like time on the y-axis and distance on the x-axis, and then what would the area under the curve give you, like velocity or something? It doesn't matter. I guess I get what you're saying.
It gives you distance traveled, I think.
Distance traveled.
Again, we're
whatever. It doesn't matter.
We're a few years deep, and we're pretty bad at math. So
exactly.
We're here to be
all of the math stuff whenever we.
But essentially, like the best way to think about it is like, all right. Let me rephrase this because again.
You want another beer?
Oh yeah, sure.
All right.
You want to pause?
No, go ahead.
I guess my thought with it would be if you think about what a minimum is, right? Like you know how if you have a parabola, right? Like where the minimum on the graph is.
Yeah.
Now imagine instead of a parabola, you have a 3-dimensional graph. Right.
Okay.
You can think about 3 dimensions, right? And a minimum is a function trying to optimize those 3, right, to be the lowest value possible, right?
Okay.
That's what a 3-dimensional graph is. Now, a 10-dimensional graph, in terms of human logic, is hard to imagine. But you see how a 3-dimensional graph is 3 variables. Now imagine 10 variables.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find a function that is able to minimize 10 variables.
And how do you do that? Just a bunch of math.
A bunch of math, man. Yeah. People have PhDs in this stuff.
Is that how like everything in, neuro and any sort of physics and any sort of chemistry, I feel like it all just boils down to a ton of math.
Yeah. Well,
I wish I knew math better, man.
No, this is like I've been ranting about this for like the last like 2 years, I feel, and that like all our math was so focused on just really getting down how to solve an equation more than it was about learning what math can do.
Yeah, it's like we learned how, we didn't learn why we're learning it. We learned like, okay, here's how to take a derivative, here's how to do an antiderivative, here's how to do, here's how to multiply matrices or something. But like, we don't know like where is this useful for anything is like where I'm coming from.
And if we talked about it, it would make a lot more sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like you just mentioned matrices, right?
Yeah.
Do you understand the idea of like, you have a matrix X, right? So let's think about this, right? Y equals mx plus b.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? That's a line.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to take one variable, multiply it by a multiplier, add another integer, and then get a result. Right? That right there, y equals mx plus b, is what really runs the underlying technology of the machine-brain interface I mentioned earlier. But instead, the variable m, my mistake. I'm misspeaking. But the word M, or the letter M stands for constant. But instead, imagine if that constant was a matrix that we had to figure out.
Okay. Okay. So M's the slope in a line, which is constant for a line, right?
Yeah.
and you're trying to. So basically, explain that again.
Okay, so essentially, remember how earlier I was mentioning the idea of a 100 electrode array?
Yeah.
We basically have to take each of those electrodes and come up with one output. That output is move arm left, right?
Okay.
So it's 10 variables, but each of those variables has to be given a qualifier or a strength, right? Like for this variable, or for the movement left, this particular electrode doesn't matter very much. Or this
You weight
electrode,
it. You give it different weights.
yeah, and that's, you see how the weighting would be a matrix.
Yeah.
It'd be a
I
10
do,
by 10
yeah.
matrix.
That's cool. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And like you can kind of like again, I'm explaining it comically poorly because I'm not a great mathematician, but you can kind of see how like these sorts of things, if they were a little bit more emphasized, would be a lot more useful. You know, like once you got to physics, you like saw the need for algebra, and like now, like initially we like learned maths just to solve problems, and it's just kind of silly how we do that because like you see like how it would be a matrix, and that's your input matrix, or that's the determined matrix, and then when you look at an input x, you can then add a signifier y, and then get a result. Move left, move right,
and then reverse it and figure out what's going on. Yeah, interesting.
It's very convoluted. But
yeah. So your research is looking at making these sort of devices, or looking at understanding what you can figure out from.
No. I wish I was that good at this stuff. My research is more looking at the way the research out there. This is just a project I was working on summer. Is just looking at like various associations within the brain and seeing how we can catalog all these papers.
That's cool. Okay, that's useful. That's so useful because I feel like there's so much research out there that's just kind of lost, and also maybe just like feeling insignificant almost, because how many people do you think are researching it across the country, just in the US?
I actually was randomly Googling this earlier, but there are about 100,000 188,000 professors in this country.
Dang, okay.
Right? Yeah. You think about like the idea of a professor is someone who does research,
or at least did research to get there.
Yeah. So if you add in like the number of professors, assistant professors, and associate professors, that's about 529,000. Is what I recollect just off the top of my head. But if that's how many people are doing research, right? Like
that's just people that are professionally doing research. Then there's all the med students like you and I, all the grad students, all the undergrad people. There's all those high school programs that people do.
Yeah.
Like there's got to be millions of people doing research. And how much of it breaks out into the headlines like, here's this awesome new thing that we found out, and like, here's more knowledge to humanity. Yeah. So much of it's just, it gets lost in the weeds because research these days is so complex. Like the thing you're talking about with all this mathematics, someone like me, or someone like probably most of the listeners, unless they have a PhD in this stuff, you open up that paper and start reading it, you're not going to know anything what's going on.
Oh, God. I hope none of your listeners have a PhD in machine learning. I'd be so embarrassed. But I feel like it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, right? Where you're like saying like, oh, like you saw like a CBS News headline, right? That said like, oh, we can interpret thoughts. But I think that's the problem. It's like they kind of
they simplify
the they simplify the conclusion is the issue.
Yeah.
But they simplify it to a degree that like I feel like it always kind of annoys me. Like, and I think everyone's always seen these. Like, is coffee bad for you?
It's not that simple.
Does vegetarianism prevent cancer? Does does eating meat cause early Alzheimer's? Stuff like that. These associations that they kind of like simplify, and I feel like these issues are a lot more complex than than research, or that the research itself shows is complex.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I just pulled up this CBS News thing again because I thought it was interesting. But they have like these pictures of the fMRI scans, and they're actually like telling the difference between when someone's thinking gossip versus when someone's thinking spirituality. It's just like different activation patterns, and
but come on, bud. You know, correlation is not equal.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying, like, this is definitely. It seems like the beginning, at least, of some way here. See if I can turn it to you at all. But no, I know what you're saying. Like, they definitely simplify. The news has to simplify it because otherwise they're just reporting the same thing that the paper reported. You know what I mean?
I mean, like,
and it's got to be like the news media is a link between what researchers do and
like,
what
I can instantly see within the study, right? Like, come on, look at what they circled right here, right? Like,
Yeah.
why they circled this for gossip and this for spirituality, and when they could have just as well circled that and that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
You see, they're like
yeah.
hunting for a conclusion.
No,
you
I
know?
know. Absolutely. But
Like you see, like
I
it
see what
cuts
you're
that
saying.
issue.
But at the same time,
I'm being very pessimistic.
no, but at the same time, like, the media does play a role because you have to have some sort of link between these hardcore researchers that maybe 50 people, 100 people in the world understand what they're talking about to distribute it out to the masses so we can kind of get a better understanding of life or better understanding of chemistry or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's still an important link. Otherwise, where would this research ever go? It'd just be stuck within that small group of people.
Of course. I mean, that's part of the problem with research is that, like, we, in terms of the stories we're kind of fed is like this idea of these like incredible innovators, and I think that like right now, all the low hanging fruit in terms of like problems we can easily solve, like like things like penicillin, things like washing your hands to prevent bacteria, things like even like DNA to some extent, like these were like relatively straightforward problems that like had like easily interpretable conclusions. But I think where this really comes into like what we can interpret is on the clinical side of things. Like a lot of this stuff is relevant to patients. Like here's a kind of crazy thought. Like there's a really big researcher here who does a lot of work with gamma knife technology, which is a sort of technology that's interpreted or that's supposed to kill spinal metastases. And what spinal metastases, or sorry, it's not spinal. Brain metastases.
Yeah.
Brain metastases are basically like cancer that starts elsewhere in the body, and then as it gets worse and worse, starts to move throughout the body and ends up in the brain, right? And obviously that sounds really bad because it's really bad. It's end stage cancer, right? However, before this researcher started doing his clinical work, the death rate of spinal or brain metastases used to be a certain number, and he was able to bring it down by 80%.
Wow.
And this happened here in the 1980s. That's like not even that long ago, and like
Right.
I guess it's 40 years ago, but still, like like that's a thing to kind of wrap your head around. Is like that means a lot for patients.
It does, yeah. But also at the same time, this low-hanging fruit, it's not necessarily that it's not still out there. We just don't know of it right now. And also at the same time, the more we build upon this research, it's almost like we're building up a ladder along the tree that has the fruit on it. Like you grab the first lowest hanging fruit, and then all this research that we just got from that lowest level, you build upon, and now you're at that next level, and you can get the fruit there. I don't know. I think there's so much room for innovation still, and I think there's so much happening, and it's so easy to get lost in what even is happening because there's so much of it, and we really only see what the media really like presents to us, unless you're out there digging on PubMed and digging through these primary lit sources.
I completely agree. I think that one thing that I like that we all need to factor in is the improvements to computing technology that has recently happened. Like computing is both cheaper and stronger than it ever used to be. And I feel like I guess my main gripe I would say is with these sorts of like news headlines that kind of minimize something down to like a good or bad issue, an A or B sort of thing, and I feel like that's not necessarily healthy.
Yeah, but what's the solution there? Do you think? Because you can't really just you can't just report all the same data that the research article reported, or it's going to be way over everyone's heads. You know what I mean?
I guess there's an in between, right? Like part of it is like when there's something to say it.
Okay.
I mean,
like don't report on these studies that say we can read your thoughts and when it's really not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, let me take you through like a sort of mental case run, okay? Follow me on this journey, if you will, right? You understand the idea of like risk, right?
Yeah.
How like
Sure.
So if you look at a certain population of people and you look at certain factors, like you can find like a risk of a certain illness, right? We've learned a lot about this in medical school, and you understand relative risk, right? So it's like how risk can change whether not whatever like variable you shift around. So let's say you look at, two populations of 1 million people. All right, that's a huge sample size.
Yeah.
Right. But you find something like if a person drinks coffee or not, right?
Mhm.
And you look at their rate of cancer over 20 years, right? And you find the people who drink coffee have uh, a relative risk of almost 100% of the people who don't, right? The answer comes down to the idea of like within a million people, 20 people in the coffee drinking group and 10 people in the non-coffee drinking group got cancer.
Right.
In a million people,
Yeah.
you know? And
So
you
that's
see how
100% increase, but it's really only, what percent of a million is that? Like,
yeah. And
point
you know what the
oh oh.
relative risk of like something like, let's say like something we like know very clearly causes cancer, like tobacco smoking, right?
Right.
Like what the risk is there? The relative risk is almost 4,000 to 5,000%.
Wow.
It would be like,
But you still have to
sorry.
put that in. Yeah, you still put that in perspective of how many people are in the sample. You put that in perspective. Yeah.
of course, but you see like how these are nuanced things, and if we
Yeah.
don't represent them as nuanced things, it like the definition goes to shit. Like
Yeah.
it all kind of just falls apart.
No,
Like
I know what
it
you're
doesn't really
saying.
mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
Because without the nuance, it's not really like interpretable.
Yeah. I mean, I guess going back to what I was saying before, there's just, I guess the media needs things to report on. There's only so much going on that they try to draw these conclusions when they're really not there. But I don't know if there's a great solution to it either way. But another thing you were talking about earlier, we kind of touched on it in passing with the education system and how, with just mathematics and in particular, we don't really feel like we got the best teaching on that. Don't really feel like it was put into a bigger picture. Do you think there's a problem with the education system today? And what's the solution there, if there is one?
I mean, it's a very like we all want easy fixes, but I don't think an easy fix is possible. But like, I think I think your listeners would be kind of shocked to hear, but like, Nick, do you go to like every lecture that they run?
No, absolutely not.
Right? And
I've maybe gone to 3 lectures this whole year.
Yeah.
Just because they were mandatory. And
I'm in the same boat. I very rarely go to lecture that like our medical school runs, and that's like what is considered like our main teaching tool.
Mm-hmm.
And we mostly like, would you say you learn from like other sources on the internet?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. Other like boards prep services, or I'll read like those books behind you. I'll read like internal med books, or like Costanzo as a physiology book. I'll read that because I feel like it does such a better job of teaching me the material, which is no knock on Pitt Med. All medical schools are this way. People learn different ways, and a lot of people learn on their own through these memory hook websites like Sketchy Medicine, or they learn better by reading than they do by just sitting there passively listening in a lecture room.
I think that's exactly what you described right there. Like, a lot of people learn in different ways.
Right.
But think about all your education before medical school. What did we learn through? We learned through lectures.
It was literally all lectures.
And I feel like you can see the kind of people who, in our class, like the people who still go to lecture, I feel like they do pretty well on tests and stuff because those are the kind of people who succeed within that system.
Yeah.
But the large majority of our class doesn't go to lecture anymore.
I would say, I think there's maybe 15 out of the 160 of us that actually go to lecture.
Yeah.
There's sometimes I'll pass by the lecture room and there'll be like, 10, 15 people scattered about the entire like lecture hall.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where, like, in terms of education, I feel like what really does us a disservice is that this format that we as adults agree do not work for us,
Right.
is what we did for the first 18 to 22 years of our first education. Like, isn't that nuts? Like, that's nuts, right?
It's crazy.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And
it's not, because it's not like the people that don't go to lecture, it's not like they're lazy. They're still putting in that same amount of time, probably even, maybe sometimes even more time.
No, they might even know more. They know just as much. Like, And it's kind of wild. I feel like it's really important to understand that, like, the idea of sitting in a lecture hall and being talked to only works for a few people. And the problem is the system itself selects for this.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
For you and me, Nick, to get where we're at right now, we do really well in school.
Yeah, you have to be able to navigate that system.
And I think that, like, I feel like that's where our educational system really does a disservice. There's a lot of people who that system just doesn't work. Like, if you gave them their own free will to kind of like learn themselves, they would not only be a lot happier, but they'd be a lot more productive.
Yeah, people would know a hell of a lot more.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I was a very mediocre high school student, and I was like, I only really came into my own in undergrad. You know, like
Okay.
in undergrad when I started kind of getting a lot of control over my own time.
Okay, so at Pitt at Pitt undergrad, you were able to like do online lectures and things like that, or was your
No,
attendance?
well, not necessarily on online lecture, but I think the biggest thing to me was, I mean, if you think about high school, you're at school from 6:30 a.m. or 7 a.m., which is earlier than any adult wants to be up, right? And you're there till 6 p.m., right? Like,
Yeah.
honestly, like
Yeah, if
do a
you're doing
thought,
sports, if you're
yeah.
doing extracurricular stuff, you're there all
Like
day.
you're miserable. Like
Yeah.
today, like we like wake up if we like have to be at school at 8, we're kind of like annoyed about it.
Everyone is
Yeah.
bitching about it. If we're
crazy.
yeah.
It's
It's like, oh, 8 a.m. We had to be here at 8 a.m. 4 days this week. Are you kidding me?
And
Like
yours
people
like
complain
like yours
so
like
much.
high school. You have to be there like 7 a.m.
That's a
every
crazy thing.
single day. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild.
There's been
like
studies showing schools that push back their start time to let like kids get more sleep at night. Just that small thing. That's way beside the point of what we're talking about. But like, just schools that push back their start time by maybe 2 hours. They start at 10:30 and go till 4 instead of 6:30 to go till 2 or whatever. Those schools that push back their start times, the students learn so much better, way higher test scores, way higher everything. Because the kids are actually sleeping on like what's a natural time. You wake up whenever the sun gets up and things like that.
And the problem is like I feel like our issue is that we determine who is or isn't capable of higher education based on how they perform within that system.
Yeah.
And
no.
the reality is at the end of it, it only works for a few people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
Yeah.
would you say like less than 25% of our class goes to lecture?
Well, less than 25.
But you see what I'm saying?
Way
Like,
less, yeah.
like if
I'd say less than 10%.
if like we as a school, like if we as a medical school are determined to be like some of the higher performing students.
Yeah, like
within
these
the
aren't
system.
stupid people.
No, but I feel like
No, I'm saying like in the medical school
no.
class.
But what I'm saying is like in terms of, like stupid and smart. I feel like the way we
Stupid and smart in the sense of like academics is what I'm saying.
No, but my issue is like we determine stupid or smart based on the system that we agree
We do, yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
For us, the quote unquote smart people, the ones who are, like after all that filtration were like picked,
Yeah.
feel like is a stupid system.
Yeah, and like I have friends that are not in academics, not in medicine. They're just like living a normal life, but I feel like are so much smarter than me, and they just kind of get it more. But they're not necessarily like a 4.0 student. They don't have 4 degrees. They don't. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like there's people out there that they just understand things.
I think the best way to put it is kind of the way I sort of started to think about medical school is because I think medical school for a lot of us is kind of unsettling because we are so used to being the best student in any of our respective classes, and for the first time, like I don't know about you, but like for the first time I feel like really dumb,
Yeah.
and like I feel like I really don't know what I'm doing at certain points in time, and I think that
Especially when you're out like in the hospital wards or
Yeah.
like shadowing and somebody asks you something, it's like I have
know.
no clue. And then they tell you and it's like, oh, I guess I knew that, but I just wouldn't have been able to retrieve it. You know what I mean?
And I think that like what I was sort of hinting at earlier in terms of our educational system is that we don't emphasize that diversity enough, because I feel that the reality is we kind of test people on one metric. We test them on grades. We test them on their ability to like regurgitate information, and that metric. And sorry, I backtracking a little bit, but like I was saying about like the idea of growing up, and I feel like for a lot of our peers and a little bit you and me, because I think you went straight through, right?
Yeah.
Where like you've never been in the workforce, and I feel like you can take that medical student who's amazing on tests, but if they're toxic to be around, if they're not the kind of person who you want to spend your day with, they're not going to be a very good doctor. If you're mean to the nurses, you're not going to be a very good doctor. If
Yeah.
the PAs don't like you, you're not going to be a very good doctor. And I think that we need to start acknowledging that diversity of skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can hear the dog whining on the podcast, I thought I would leave her upstairs because if she was down here, I figured she'd be making a lot of noise.
Mhm.
But so I closed the door upstairs and let her just like free roam, and now she misses us. But anyways, so what you were saying was that there's people with a very diverse skill set, and in medicine we kind of need that diverse skill set, and there's certain skills that maybe we're not selecting for that we should be, and ones that we are selecting for that maybe don't matter quite so much.
Exactly.
Yeah, like who can take a better standardized MCAT test versus, can this person actually have a face-to-face conversation with somebody and not be a complete jackass? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think one thing I definitely talked about in my applications, and one thing that's always drawn me to being a doctor, is the idea of like, I feel like I'm the kind of person who's never been the best at anything, but um, medicine is a profession where if you're the 90th percentile at most things, you're amazing. You're like one of the best doctors. If you're someone who's, knows most of what they're talking about, and they're amazing with patients, they're great at talking with people, you're amazing in the OR, you're amazing with the other professions like the nurses and the PAs, you're an excellent doctor.
Yeah.
More so than you are on that singular metric of how good are you on standardized tests or how good are you on our like in-house exams. And I think that that's something that's not really taken into account sometimes.
I think school, the way it is right now, doesn't necessarily test, especially those things, but doesn't necessarily even test knowledge. It tests obedience. Like how much can you put, how much time can you put down to memorize these facts and regurgitate them on the exam?
Oh God,
like how obedient are you?
Like to be completely honest, I was a terrible like elementary school kid, right? I legit thought I was a terrible student, right? Until I saw my grades one day in first grade, because I'm an immigrant. I'm not from here, so I don't really English is my second language, and I always thought that like I was a horrible student because I was you can
Really,
tell like,
English is your second language?
Yeah.
You speak it so like. When did you learn English?
I started learning English when I was about 5.
Wow. Okay.
Or four probably.
What other language do you know?
I speak Bengali.
Wow,
Bengali is my
nice.
first language.
That's awesome.
But I think like in terms of like that sort of metric, right? Like I was an incredibly poorly behaved student, and like if you went back to interview my middle school teachers, my elementary school teachers, they would I was very disruptive in class. And I think that those sorts of students are people who are kind of kicked out of our academic system, and I feel like that's a
or
real
they're put
disservice.
on like ADHD medication.
Yeah, right. And
which is another entire rabbit hole to get on that we don't need to do.
No, but like I feel like what's the sad part about it is like I legitimately thought I was not a good student. I thought I wasn't very smart until I saw my grades as a 6-year-old, right, in first grade. Looking at my grades, I was like, wait, every single one of my grades is like above average except for like the ones for behavior, right? And I think that that sort of carries through our educational system, in that a lot of our first like elementary school and middle school, and like I think Nick would back me up on this, like up till even like high school, a lot of it is just shit. Sit down, shut up, tell us what we want, like tell us what we told you,
Yeah. No, I think almost everybody could agree to that. Everyone's pretty much gone through all that. And it's very frustrating if you don't learn that way. So I personally feel like I, in some ways at least, do learn in that manner, because otherwise we wouldn't be where we are. But for the people that don't learn that way and don't,
I mean,
don't
I think you, in terms of this podcast, I'm a big fan of it. And I think that what you've really touched on is the idea of like insights of all trades, and like people who are like coming from various different educational and professional backgrounds, and the idea that like a lot of people in different like circumstances succeed in different ways, and they find their own ways to thrive. And I feel like us being very, very entrenched in the world of academia, like we are graduate students right now. Like even though we think of ourselves as med students, we are truly graduate students, right? Like we are what would be thought of as quote unquote smartest of all the students in America today. And within our peer group, I feel like the reality is we were kind of able to cope with that system a lot better than some of our other peers who may have succeeded right now, because we even mentioned it, is like, we hate lectures. Lectures don't work for either
Yeah.
of us two.
Exactly.
And it's a kind of depressing thought to think of how we kind of exclude people from higher education sometimes,
Yeah.
when they're not capable of keeping up with that sort of system.
Well, and even thinking like within our own medical school class, how there's people that learn, based on lecture, people that learn based on videos, people that learn based on just doing problems. There's such a heterogeneity there that that's just within our medical school class of like the cream of the crop, like academic people. But then expand that across literally everything. And there's just so much heterogeneity that, you can't, I don't know, excluding people because of a standardized test score or something like that. It just doesn't make sense, because there's so many other qualities about those people that, they could make a great XYZ doctor, nurse, whatever, engineer, banker. It's just, yeah.
It's just that
It's frustrating.
It's kind of a sad thought, because we between the two of us have really like fought through that system, like kind of understood like, like, here's how we operate, here's what we do. And I feel like only recently, within the last, like, within medical school, have I really been the kind of person to take advantage of how I learn. And I think we talk a lot about like the resources that we use that are outside of lecture, because the field of education itself is changing. Like, education is becoming a lot more democratic. Like, you see things like Khan Academy, things where they teach that level of material to whoever wants to watch a video.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's that. I think that,
or even just YouTube, man.
Yeah.
Like, you can get on YouTube and find whatever you want to learn. If you want to learn how to lay down tile for your bathroom, you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
If you want to learn how to do like a single leg defense for jiu-jitsu, you can learn it on YouTube. If you know what I mean, like, there's just everything's out there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like seriously, like, I feel like more so, like, earlier we were talking about like how we interpret thoughts, but I feel like what's really gonna change the world, what's really gonna like make a big impact, is the idea that any person around the country, around the world, my mistake, around the world that has access to the internet can learn whatever they want to learn.
Yeah.
Like, you see it today. Like, we see it in the news all the time. We're also like mind numbed, like mind blown by the idea of like, 16-year-olds who are able to code and like create amazing apps. But here's the thing: we could have all done that. And like, I do this kind of strange thought experiment, right? And I like kind of carry this with me, right? Like,
Yeah.
Like, Nick, like, you've grown up as a person, like, as you've gone through the system, right? And imagine if you took yourself, and the decade's about to change, right? So it's 2019. Think about where you were at in 2009, right?
Yeah.
Same time, December.
Do you want
right?
those? Did you ever see those on Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah.
Like a 10-year challenge or whatever.
Yeah, the 10-year challenge, right? Like, but like,
think about it academically.
Yeah, no. Think about like if you took yourself right now to where you were at 10 places or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You could probably make it to like any college you wanted to. You could have gone to like whatever like high-end institution you wanted to.
And that's what I'm saying with the obedience thing. Is like, it's just testing how much you can put towards it. Like, what distinguishes you from somebody that learned all of like cardiology, renal, palm, GI on Khan Academy and knows everything that you know. The only thing that distinguishes you is you have the program that you got into based on being
That stamp of
obedient.
legitimacy.
And yeah, exactly. And you spent that amount of time, and you put in that you put in the time in something that validated that you put in that time. So like undergrad, the first few years of medical school. Whereas if you're just reading this stuff online, you're reading primary literature, you're doing Khan Academy, you're doing sketchy medical, and you're learning all the same stuff, you don't have somebody behind it saying that, yes, he actually did that.
Yeah. I feel like I personally, like, there's a lot of debate these days about, like, the cost of college education. And I think that, like, there is a sort of culling that will come about it, because fundamentally, like old style education in the days before the internet was from your teachers. It was from lecture. It was from that sort of format. But the reality is we don't need that format anymore. And I wonder what the world will become when we don't need it anymore.
Yeah, that'd be
Because
interesting.
Truly, like, I mean, would you say that 95% of the medicine you know right now was learned from the internet?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not wild. That's a crazy thought, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I
Like
mean,
in reality, like anyone with our like, I guess like there was some like intangibles that we gained from like our undergraduate like biology education, because I learned a lot of like of that like basic terminology from that. But like in reality, like what we learned, we could have learned like 4
even
years ago.
yeah, even the 95% that, okay, the 5% of beyond that 95% that I maybe didn't learn on the internet, it's definitely on the internet somewhere that I could have learned it that way.
Yeah, or
You know what
like
I mean?
maybe not, but you said if you could say 95% of a profession could be taught on the internet, that's a very different ball game than like the interpretation we're sold. I think they talk a lot about the issue of like dealing with college debt
Mhm.
and the college infrastructure, and it is something that, like we need to really address. Is that like, do we really need colleges in the traditional sense anymore? Like,
Yeah, do
what?
we?
Yeah, like, do we like? I don't. I personally think that we could come up with a better system
Yeah,
because
the problem is actually enacting that change because it's such an established tradition, an
mhm.
established thing. I mean, how many colleges do you think there are out there? I
uh
have no clue. I'll Google it.
thousands, but I
Yeah,
feel like to me like the thought really comes from this. Like I like the idea of standardized tests where they ask you like what you're capable of.
yeah.
Like I feel like like
All right, real quick, 5,300 colleges in the U.S. alone. So, like, how
that's
established is
wild.
that? How much money is pouring into those things? How many people are at them? How many alumni that support them? You're not going to just change that with a piece of legislation or something. You're not going to change it with a few ideas that people have on a podcast. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't really know how you go about really. I guess it's just kind of naturally happening with the internet, and some of these colleges, I guess, are starting to do like online things. I know I went to Penn State, and now they have World Campus Penn State, so you can get your degrees online. I mean, it's starting to trend that way. Do you think it's just like these colleges will end up taking over the online section of it? And
I think that what really needs to happen is that we need to give a lot of people more agency over their education a lot earlier than we really do. Like, do you only feel like up till like legitimately like we said like we started Prologue, right?
yeah,
That was a year and a half ago, right? Would you like up until a year and a half ago, you just kind of like did what you were told,
yeah, absolutely,
and that's a sad thought, isn't
it
it?
is.
Like,
Yeah,
because like think about
I
all
mean,
the
we
like
still, to a very high degree, still do that.
yeah, but like even
We have
like
a little bit of flexibility with how we do it, but like you're still doing what you're told.
and it's really sad that like that's what our education system kind of boils down to is like your ability to do what you're told.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was coming from with that obedience thing. But also,
Sorry.
no, on the same, on the similar lines, um, you do what you're told with that. But shoot, I'm losing my train of thought here.
I think what you were
Lost
gonna
my train of
pivot
thought.
to was this idea that I think that our educational system encourages a certain or
Oh.
immobility of thought.
Yeah, I actually know where I was going with this.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Were you gonna say something?
Oh no, go
Okay.
for it, go ahead.
So what I was gonna say was, I think that it's going to be opened up pretty soon in the future with things like AI, because with artificial intelligence and that being able to take over these factory jobs, these self-driving trucks, how many people drive trucks across the US, across the world? It's going to get rid of all those jobs, but it's going to allow all those people to, hopefully, anyways, it's going to allow all these people to explore different avenues of more creative things, what works for them, what kind of things they want to learn, and how they want to contribute back to maybe society or to their own you know, their own being and their own ideas and, what their life's about. You know what I mean? Like, how many people do you think actually, of the people that drive trucks across the US or drive, whatever, how many do you think actually enjoy that? Probably like 10, 20%. I don't know. I'm really guessing. I don't know if it could be more than that, but I'm just saying, like, it seems like those people, things like whenever AI comes around, things like that are going to be displaced for the human people to be working on that, and it's going to allow them more time to do what they want and maybe become more creative.
See, Nick, like what's really funny is like earlier you were being such a futurist where like you took what the neuroscience studies took or found to an extreme, right? And I think that what you've kind of hit upon is what I think is the reality of what's going to happen, right? Is that in our world, the menial jobs, the sort of things that you clock in and clock out of and exit yourself from, those are going to start to disappear. We're going to see a world of automation. And I think that within the context of education, we need to acknowledge that. We need to like embrace that idea. Like a lot of our education is this idea of like regurgitate what you were taught, like learn this, learn that, learn X, Y, Z, and then regurgitate it back. And I think that like what's so important is instead to learn how to think, how to interpret, how to deal with complex problems, because those are what we need humans for. Because as we see all this AI develop, that's where the world is moving towards. And I think that
so do you think, a couple hundred years from now, when AI has everything under control, they're doing all the jobs that we're doing now, do you think all the humans are just going to be like philosophers basically, or artists, or whatever the AI can't do, that's going to be us?
Well, I think, oh man,
it's hard to spitball that far in the future.
No. I love thinking about this idea, but like you're like spitballing me, but like the way I say it, like remember earlier when we were talking about philosophy and in the context of science, I think that like a lot of people who are like fairly religious may not understand like the overlap between science and religion in terms of science and spirituality, right? Because fundamentally, like our science needs to have a purpose. It needs to like be like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that like the purpose of science is to see where like humanity can go. Like what can we accomplish with that? So like we take all these sorts of tasks that, like within the last 20 years, we've seen it. Like, I mean, I'm from Detroit. Like automation took most of the jobs out of Detroit. It ruined the economy. And like, that's what happened. And I feel like that's something that needs to be reckoned for.
See, why does it ruin the economy? Because the same thing's getting done. I guess that the problem is it's not going. The money that would be getting done through a human isn't going back to that person. It's just going to whoever owns the machine, which is actually now that I think about it, it's pretty big problem.
Politics,
yeah, well, you can get into that, but yeah,
I mean, like
Andrew Yang's campaigning about what do you call it?
Universal basic income.
Yeah, universal basic income.
I mean, I think it's just
it might be jumping the gun a little bit there, but it's going to definitely be important someday whenever automation has everything taken over and people just can't make money.
Well, I mean, it just comes down to like what automation can do and what humans can do, right? Mm-hmm. So automation can do what you tell it to do, right? And we need to like create the sorts of folks who are able to like dictate what automation can do. And I feel like a lot of our educational system, like that's why I complain about so much, is I feel like it's something that could cater more towards creative thinking when it caters towards memorization and computation.
Yeah,
like all our math and computation, a lot of our other a lot of our science, especially our science.
Well, those things are definitely and those things are definitely important, but the level that we have to go about it is insane. It's the exam we have this coming Wednesday, it's all just going to be based on how much did you memorize before it. It's not like, do you understand this concept that plays in with this concept and how they're interlinked or anything. No, it's just, do you understand this rote memorization?
Like, the simple questions is like, if you took an exam that we take, all right, and obviously, like, this is kind of minimalizing it to an extent because obviously you can't look every single thing up, but if you took an exam and made it open book and all of a sudden that exam goes from hard to easy, maybe it was a bad exam.
Yeah.
Like if all it came down to was information that you as a professional could access with the devices that are available to you in the scope of practice that you're working in.
Yeah.
If that's what it came down to and that's all the difficulty is, then maybe it's a shit exam. And I think that I think that like you laugh, but like I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like like that's the problem with our educational system. Is like we only emphasize that. Like we emphasize that which calculators can do. We emphasize that which the internet can look up.
Yeah, and
And
it's like,
instead
what's
of-
the point in having these tools if we're just gonna we're just doing it ourselves? Yeah,
Because like the comedy of it is that like one day, like I mean I don't know about you, but like you've talked to actual providers while you were shadowing.
absolutely. Yeah,
Like you think they know like the contraindications to like whatever XY like you think they know these like diseases that have like 1 in 200,000 prevalences? No, they don't. Like they don't know this.
they
shit.
can look it up if they need to.
If they really need to,
Yeah.
but like you see what I'm saying, like that's the problem. It's like we don't teach to the profession, we teach to a standardized test or some sort of metric
Yeah,
that I don't think is necessarily healthy for us to do.
yeah, that's true. I don't have a solution. Do you?
I think our solution.
I guess first of all, you have to make people realize it's a problem.
Yeah,
and
I
then,
mean, like the biggest solution to me is the idea that our med school grades don't matter. You know, like
Yeah.
I feel like you and I have a test next. What
Wednesday.
Tuesday? Yeah, you said we don't even know when the test is.
Yeah.
Like, but I feel like we're not too stressed about it because I feel like we're looking at the bigger picture, which is like our license exams,
Mhm.
which will really determine like what we can do. But like, in the sense that like these tests have become pass fail because, fundamentally these exams really need to be pass fail. Like the A grade shouldn't be like what we need to strive for. We should strive for creativity. We should strive for excellence.
No, I totally agree, man.
That's
Yeah.
a good place to end it.
Yeah, for sure, dude. Thanks for coming on the show. Do you have anything you want to promote at all? I guess probably
Promote.
not. I mean,
I guess
we-
I mentioned a few really good content links.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
guess I'll talk about them. So I thought the Wait But Why catalog would be excellent for your listening base.
Mhm.
It's a blog about a guy who loves procrastination. He talks about a lot of like highbrow topics, very, very interesting stuff. Imagine like a blog post that is 15 pages long, but it's totally worth a read.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing I'd emphasize.
What about any sort of books you've been reading? Anything that's like changed your life in, small or big ways? Any books, podcasts, any sort of, YouTube? If not, no big deal. Just
I mean, man, I love so much content.
Yeah.
Like this is the stuff that like really like sings to me. It's the kind of things I enjoy. I guess if anyone's looking for a book recommendation that you've never heard of, there's a book called Alamut.
How do you spell that?
Alamut.
Okay.
If you guys have heard of Assassin's Creed, it's part of the base lore for that. Alamut is a 1938 novel written by a Slovenian author living in France about Middle Ages Arabia,
Wow.
and it is 10 out of 10 amazing. My favorite book of all time.
Nice.
Other basic shows I like, like Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, but that's
Yeah.
the only
Well,
thing
I
there.
mean, the reason I ask is because I feel like if people kind of identify with you as a person, they identify with your character. A lot of that you can kind of understand someone better through what kind of stuff they do and what kind of
Oh,
stuff
man.
they enjoy.
Did
So
I,
it's just
did I,
like,
I swear, did I tell you about this idea? Like,
no.
okay, I feel like to me, what I love media a lot. Like I love books, I love television, I love these sorts of avenues of thought. And I think that what's really resonated with me is the idea that like what you like is a reflection of yourself.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way.
And so I feel like I take the things I'm interested in kind of personally. And like I know sometimes I can lead to problems like we have like very toxic fandoms and stuff like that. But like overall, like I feel like the things I enjoy are things I enjoy. And it says a lot about someone where like you can, hey, like what's your favorite TV show? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite like video game? Like those are sorts of things that really let you get to know a person.
Yeah, and it's just a fun question to end on.
Oh, of course.
So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, see you back in class.
All right.
See you, everybody.
Back to the trenches, boys.
Yep. Thanks for listening, everybody. You can find us on Facebook at Insights of All Trades. Find us on Instagram at Insights of All Trades. Twitter is IOAT Podcast. And send us your insights via email at insightsofalltrades@gmail.com. You can also DM us if you have some insights, and we'll include you at the beginning of the podcast. Thanks again. See you soon.